So let us start, sir. NP, let us start. Adursha, sir.
Yeah. You're the boss. Whenever you say, we're ready.
Yeah. Okay. Respected National President, Sri Adul Shah. Speaker today, Dr. Shakila Shamsu. Moderator of the day, Dr. Kiranmai ma'am. Other national office bearers of ISTD, National Council members, chapter chairpersons, members of ISTD, members from student chapters, our members from our learning and development fraternity. A very good evening to you all. Today it is a very special day because we are starting a webinar series from the side of ISTD Southern region. Basically, this is an attempt or an initiative to create a platform where we can bring outstanding scholars, knowledge workers, who can share their wisdom, their experience with the members of Learning and Development Fraternity who are part of ISTD. And today we have an outstanding Dr. Shakila Shamsu, former ISD of New Education Policy, with us to deliver a lecture on the evolving landscape of globalized higher education. We all know the higher education scenario is undergoing a transformation. In today's interconnected world, the landscape of globalized higher education is evolving rapidly. And India stands at the forefront of this transformation with an increasingly mobile student population and the integration of international curricula. Indian universities are embracing global collaboration like never before. This shift is not only marked by the influx of foreign institutions setting up campuses, but also by Indian institutions enhancing their global reach through partnerships, research collaborations, and student exchange programs. The demand for world-class education is now met through digital platforms, making quality learning more accessible to students in rural and urban areas alike. However, while global exposure brings vast opportunities, it also presents challenges in maintaining cultural identity and ensuring that the local context is not lost in the pursuit of global rankings. India's rich education heritage continues to influence this journey as institutions strike a balance between global best practices and homegrown knowledge systems. In conclusion, the evolving landscape of globalized higher education in India promises exciting growth and opportunities, provided we continue to innovate while staying grounded in our unique academic traditions. I said just this to set the context for the lecture of Dr. Shakila Shamsu. So I do not want to prolong the welcome speech because we need to give maximum time to the resource person and the moderator to make this session more enriching and meaningful. So I move on to my duty. First of all, I welcome our national president, Sri Adul Shah, who is very vibrant, dynamic, always encouraging us to come up with innovative ideas to deliver for the benefit of the members. So on behalf of everyone present here, I welcome Sri Adul Shah, our national president, to this inaugural session of Southern Region webinar series. Welcome, sir.
Thank you.
We have Dr. Shakila Shamsu, an outstanding scholar, a great orator, who is the architect of national education policy. So she is former OSD of NEP, Minister of Education. Rather, I should say she was the member secretary of the drafting committee of New Education Policy 2020. Kiranmai ma'am will give a detailed introduction, so I'm not trying for that. On behalf of everyone present here, I extend a cordial and warm welcome to Dr. Shakila Shamsu. Welcome, ma'am. Today's moderator is Kiranmai ma'am, who is part and parcel of ISTD. No introduction is required, who was working with the Fortune 500 companies. So today, ma'am is going to moderate the session. So as a matter of formality, I extend a warm welcome to Kiranmai ma'am. Welcome, ma'am. We have our national office bearers, senior national council members, members from all parts of the country, students from student chapters, our well-wishers from different domain of different parts of the country. So to save time, I welcome all in a single word. Welcome to this inaugural session of the webinar series of Southern ISTD region. Welcome you all. And now I invite our National President to deliver the inaugural address.
Thank you, Dr. Zakaria. I recollect these words I heard during my engineering days. My favorite lecturer, Mr. Menon, who taught us fluid mechanics, used interesting quotes linked to education. He said, I recollect 40 years down the line, the task of the modern educator is not to cut down jungles, but to irrigate deserts. Way back in 1981, I heard it for the first time. It is joy undiluted to be sharing these inaugural moments with Team South of ISTD India. Each of our regions in our ISTD country is resplendent with their salience and uniqueness. The southern region in ISTD has epitomized learning for decades. Some of ISTD's finest trainers and academicians have arisen from the south. None of our chapters in the south have let grass grow below their feet. They've always been innovating, always on the move, whether it be Chennai to Hyderabad, Bangalore to Kochi, Vizag to Trivandrum, all the chapters in the south have been throbbing with positive action. Learning has remained the southern niche, and we at India also learn from the brand that the southern chapters have. Compliments and kudos to all our southern chapters. Today, Dr. Zakaria has brought those lovely roses into one wonderful fragrant bouquet of the southern region. Our regional vice president, Dr. Zakaria, who envisaged this learning series, has been applauded for his brimming drive towards the growth of others. He's been a mentor par excellence. I have had a chance to interact and rub shoulders with him quite often, and he has the mojo and the gumption and the grit to make things happen and bring people together. We today take a deep dive into NEP. We are privileged to have a woman of substance and erudition, Dr. Shakila, sharing her insights. Thank you, madam, for joining this ISTD forum. I was at the Mumbai conference recently, and I must say, arguably, the finest person on the stage amongst all our panels was Dr. Kiranmai, who is here today. She brings with her a rare combination of prudence and flair. I recollect again my lecturer, Mr. Menon. He had his unique ways during his engineering days. He would come to his class with just half a chalk in the class. That was way back 1981 when PPTs were not in. He would write on the board with only what was possible with half the chalk. That would take him less than 5 minutes. He would then say, my job as an educator is to realize that your engineering minds are a fire to be ignited, not a pot to be filled. The next 35 minutes of his class were a magic mix laced with sharing, questioning, probing, arguing, disagreeing, pondering, conceptualizing, and much more. He made engineering literally poetry in action, leading us to new perspectives and digesting new rudiments. The NEP probably also aims at fresh answers to fertile learning. We will be all ears as Dr. Shakila shares today. To all our dear ISTD members across the country and guests who have joined, I feel upbeat and elated to be representing an organization that has sparked growth, tapped potential, and catapulted careers for 54 long and memorable years. Great start, Dr. Zakaria. Motivation is good, but consistency will be the challenge. Looking forward to episode 2 soon. Thank you and looking forward to this wonderful seminar. Over to you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you so much, National President Adil Shah, for your encouraging and motivating words. Now I hand over the podium to Madam Kiranmai. Ma'am, please take over.
Thank you, Dr. Jakaria. And as always, I know the inaugural address by our President Atul Shah is always going to be inspiring because he sets the right tone. And we have such an amazing speaker today. Aren't we all fortunate? Because as we kickstart this series for the Southern webinar series for learning under the leadership of Dr. Zakaria, it's awesome to start off with an eminent speaker like Dr. Shakila Shamshu. Let me, before I hand over to Dr. Shakila, introduce, while we heard a few things about her being the architect, I mean, those are absolutely the right terms. When we look at what she has accomplished in her 4 decades of career journey, and wherein she spent 25 years in academia, teaching in multiple universities. The notable among them are University of Mumbai and, of course, IGNOU. So as we look at what she has accomplished, are you able to hear me?
Yes,
ma'am.
you are audible. Yes, you are audible.
Okay, super. Because it's talking about the capacity, there is some pop-up message. So that's where I got distracted. So she joined Dr. Shakila Shamshu, and I was chatting up with her the other day, and it was such a pleasure to listen in her erudite thoughts. And very soon, I'm not going to stop. Hello, am I with you?
Yeah, ma'am.
Okay, super. So there is some distraction on the screen, so I wasn't too sure. So what Dr. Shakila Shamshu has accomplished, as I talked about the 4 decades, she has also been invited, and that's the architecting of the national education policy. And we at ISTD, as we all know, we are in the learning and development, training, and constantly associated with education. So we have several educators and professionals who are faculty members in various universities across the country. So she has been associated with the Department of Higher Education, invited to be the secretary to the committee to draft the national education policy. And she has actively contributed to this policy. And also as a nodal officer of the flagship Government of India scheme of National Mission on Teachers and Teaching. And prior to this, as OSD in the Ministry of Education, she has worked on the 12th plan, and she was joint advisor education in the Planning Commission. And all this was on deputation. Her core areas of interest are educational planning, policy making, and implementation. And largely, she was focused on tertiary level education. And she also spent her time on faculty development, teacher education, ICT enabled learning, and open and distance learning, as well as inclusive education. So there's so much to tap into and learn from her experience, the insights, not just on national education policy, but let us also look at, because we do have educators and we also have professionals, consultants, trainers, and corporate leaders among us. So let us see how do we connect these different academia and industry, these different streams, and what has Dr. Shakila contributed. And of course, she has a PhD in distance education and a PG diploma in distance education, masters in political science, and of course, multiple awards she has garnered in her career. So, with this, I would invite Dr. Shakila Shamshu to first join us and share her opening remarks on the topic. And from there, we're going to proceed with the conversation and an interactive dialogue.
Thank you, Dr. Kiranmai, for I think very prolific words of introduction, which I think the time frame really didn't permit. Greetings to the National President, Mr. Atul Shah, the Regional Chair. If I'm giving my introductory of the dignitaries in the wrong way, please accept my apologies. Regional Southern Chapter Chair, Dr. Zakaria, and all other national office bearers, and everyone who's present over here. Greetings on an evening of Tuesday, February 18. It's a pleasure to be associated with ISTD, and I must also thank Dr. Zakaria and the ISTD for always inviting me to talk about education, which is something that is so passionate to me. Having said that, I just want to sort of say a few remarks because I think this would be like an exchange of thoughts between Dr. Kiranmi and myself, and then later on have the interaction that could happen. So I'm just setting the tone by, of course, I must also congratulate Dr. Zakaria for having really captured in a nutshell what the whole scenario of, because when I gave the title Globalized Higher Education, I'm looking at a highly interconnected world today, which is so technologically driven that we cannot afford to think of nation states achieving any goals, be it in the quality or the inclusivity or sustainability, unless we look at the globe as a village itself. So it is in that context that I wanted some few thoughts to be sort of shared for us to start getting provoked into thinking that while we have been continuously saying for a pretty long time, I would say a good 30 years, that higher education is undergoing a lot of transformation. The actual kickstarting of that transformation in a real sense and the impact of that is being felt by the stakeholders at this stage, in the sense that you have teachers, students, the heads of institutions, all of them sort of realizing that, you know, there is a lot of change happening. We are unable to cope with that change. And we are finding it very difficult because you're juxtaposing a lot of what seem to be very divergent views coming together. And I'm just trying to set that the divergence is coming in age-old understanding that teaching and research are two separate compartments. It is also coming in from the view that skilling and mainstream education are two different compartments. We were not looking at innovation in the way it should have been looked at a good 20 to 30 years back. We are waking up now to the idea of entrepreneurship and the whole idea that, you know, we can have graduates who are not necessarily sort of following a career path alone, but are setting careers for others and becoming what we use a cliche term of becoming the job creators. Now, along with all this that is happening, you need to take the global context where we are talking in terms of sustainable development. We are talking in terms of the importance of understanding the need for sustainable societies and creating opportunities where we look at global issues of climate change, of technology and privacy, looking at research which can be beneficial to the community, looking at many issues which are in terms of let us say, reducing the carbon footprint and so on, which are no longer issues that only relate to individual nations. And that global issues that we are talking about puts the need for us as people in the sector, be it academia, be it people in training, be it people in the industry, be it people in the research laboratories, in the skilled workforce, all of us being developing what we may call a global culture. And a global culture goes beyond saying the cliche term again of global citizenship. Because when you say global culture, it is accepting identities that go beyond the local, the regional, the national to look at global identities. And that would mean having an ability to embrace a lot of, I would say, embrace a lot of diversity. Now that is, when I say that, I am actually quite at, at what seems to be a very dichotomous situation. On one side, we are talking about education looking at students embracing diversity, where on one side you're seeing a deep rooted nationalism that is coming in the way of it. So there is a juxtaposition that is happening at a political level, which is diametrically opposed to what education and globalized education is looking at. And these are some of the challenges that we also need to take in. But we also want students, when we say global citizenship, to have very clear skills of the 21st century of communication skills, collaborative skills, and cognitive skills, and creative skills, and so on, and become as what we may call independent learners. I was quite happy to hear the national president, Mr. Atul Shah, talking about actually liberating the minds and developing the joys of learning, which is very critical to making very empowered individuals, and not actually merely being subscribing to a thought process because it has been told to them to do so, but rather being able to question and arrive at decisions and take very considered views and stands as required. While saying all that, it is equally important that the education systems today respond to the humanistic world and are conscious about the fact that we need to look at peace education, we need to look at creating universal human values. And while we talk about India's civilizational strength and the values of integrity and so on, it is very, very equally pertinent that we look at many other dimensions of, let us say, unity in diversity. We look at aspects that lead to actual, let us say, dignity of human individuals. The dignity of human individuals today by the United Nations would not be defined as just talking in terms of having, food to eat and clothing to wear and a roof above our head, but to have decent livelihood, to have life skills that are able to make these people become independent and not be a dependent population. And that is where the Indian context becomes even more important. Why should our schools and colleges and universities, what should they be doing so that they equip the students with a kind of a repertoire of knowledge and skills and capabilities that can help them to become productive individuals? And let us also be clear that the only thing constant today is the actually dynamic pace with which change is happening. And that's happening because if you're talking about chat GPT and how it dominated, and when the deep sea came in, how are we reacting to that? So we are living in a highly volatile world, and we are having educational systems which are very slow to adapt, extremely slow to adapt. Whether it is schools or whether it's colleges, we are into a deep state of mind where we are unable to change and where we are unable to adapt. So you are having a big challenge. And so when the national education policy talked about the goals of access, equity, quality, affordability, and accountability, we were looking at a very holistic manner, or a very complementary manner in which these need to be achieved, so that one is not at divergence to the other. And that led to other notions which is globally accepted today of a comprehensive kind of an education which moves away from silo-based education to a very holistic and integrated kind of education that allows children to marry social sciences with engineering, or marry sports with, let us say, agriculture, something that was not even visualized, and something which our minds find it difficult even now to accept, because we all come from a very structured system of education. So there have been many changes that have globally taken place, The policy needs to be contextualized within those changes. And from what we have, because this July we complete 5 years of the policy. And it's very painful for someone who was part of that policy formulation to even now see that discussions that happen around the policy is as if NEP is still the elephant in the room. And that is a good 5 years into the policy itself, which means that we have a long way to go in terms of really taking off on ground what it had actually envisaged. And we are really moving with very, very limited baby steps, which is not, I would not feel that as a very positive way in which NEP implementation is happening. But at the same time, the eternal optimist that I would be, I would always say that maybe change takes place much later in the social sector. And so we need to allow time and space for institutions to gradually adapt, faculty to adapt, students to adapt, and a major stakeholder that higher education refuses to take on board are the parents. Parents tend to be very, very great stumblers who are not willing to accept changes because, like us, they come from a generation which did not understand why these changes are so imperative. I call it the imperativeness of flexibility in the higher education landscape, which is the essence of allowing individuals to actually optimize and maximize their talent in the way their trajectory is best suited to them, not dictated by institutions or structures. I'll stop here, Kiran Pei, for the opening remarks.
Wonderful, wonderful. So we can clearly evidence the passion with which you have painted, almost like a paintbrush, the vast breadth and thought process of crafting and drafting the national education policy. The holistic nature of it. You touched upon the VUCA world. You touched upon the lack of initiative. You touched upon aspects where the stakeholders, the community, be it the parents, be educators, the policymakers, how they all have to come together in order to create this transformative power of education, leveraging it. I mean, fascinating. And I guess you touched upon the creative genius, tapping into the creative potential of students and how they should be able to think beyond the silos. And you also touched upon culture and you talked about global citizenship. So, with one stroke, you actually brought in multiple dimensions and elements. So, we're not just talking about a policy, we are looking at so many facets which has the transformative power once it's implemented in its fullest, the way it's envisaged by the policymakers. And I know we can see the concern and pain in you when you're looking at 5 years and we haven't seen much of a momentum. But we all know when there is a fixed mindset, which is what you're alluding to, among all the stakeholders, and how we can progress further policy. I mean, that's a first major step where the national education policy is unveiled. People are still figuring out, some are skeptical, which happens, and that's where you alluded to the VUCA world. Industry could be another lever, because when the corporates and the industry, they are the ones who are going to do the intake of these students from the tertiary level. And then the startup ecosystem, because simultaneously we also have to look at how are we growing entrepreneurs. So if we can really start also working with the industry, and industry understands they need creativity and innovation and not just someone with a paper degree alone, I think that will create the impetus for the educators to start moving a little more agile manner, as you said, Dr. Shakila. Now, my first question to you, given all this landscape and the multiple challenges you refer to, you also refer to ChatGPT, the latest one, and the DeepSeek, and what happened in terms of the stock market crashing, and all interesting things are happening all around. Now, this technology continues to be very, very powerful because it continues to bring in new dimensions. How are you seeing that being integrated into the new educational policy implementation? What do you see as an opportunity window for various stakeholders? Over to you.
Technology integration, as we looked at in the policy, in fact, if you are looking at the time frame when we wrote the policy, it is just as we were finalizing the document, the 66-page actual policy, it is when COVID hit us. And
Right.
that is how we actually were talking about only using of technology and its integration. But then we really wrote a chapter entirely on online education and the need for digital, uh, addressing issues of digital divide and so on. So we have actually leapfrogged into using technology because COVID was an accelerator, despite
Right.
all its other negatives that were there. And in a certain sense, the policy took into account that India at that stage also was already using technology in terms of teaching and learning, in terms of assessment, in terms of improving pedagogical tools. But there was a lot of disparate efforts that were taking place. And so, what was happening was a country which has very limited resources was reinventing the wheel again and again. And to put that all into a very optimal manner, we visualized setting up a National Educational Technology Forum, which actually has fructified. It is not called as NETF as we wrote it in the policy. It is being called as the National Educational Alliance for Technology, and that is within the All India Council for Technical Education. And it tries to take into account that you have massive open online courses, you have distance education institutions which offer a lot of courses. In addition to that, all the interventions that we need to do, where we start using technology for capacity building in terms of developing e-content, and because we wrote about the fact that the NEP proposed multilingualism, and therefore the need for promoting Indian languages, and that our over dependence on only English language must not necessarily be a deterrent for people from rural areas coming into higher education, because you have to de-elitize higher education, and to de-elitize higher education you need to make it available. So to have e-content in regional languages, that becomes a very important aspect. And you use technology for translating a lot of materials into regional languages, other than, of course, the e-content, a lot of available resources and so on. That is one side of looking at technology for the improving the access, making it very inclusive, addressing digital divides, both at an individual institutional level, which was one of the reasons why during the COVID we had a lot of learning. Um, uh, you know, uh, we had a lot of negativities in our learning trajectories because of the lack of individual preparedness and the institutional preparedness. And therefore, looking at digital divide and offline methods by which technology can come into use became very, very fundamental to the progression of those sections to use digital platforms. At the same time, the importance of governance and to use technology for data, because higher education, till we came out with the All India Survey of Higher Education, was actually having a huge paucity of data. And without data, you cannot do any futuristic planning. So it became very important that for management of data, you need to have a very effective management information systems. And you need to have data that can be retrievable with the use of all the technology platforms. And you also need to have enterprise resource planning, where you actually streamline processes and procedures within educational institutions with minimal. And now you also know that because of the recent unpleasant event that took place in NAC accreditation, we are also doing it in terms of actually using technology in terms of giving accreditation, which was something we have written in the policy also, because we wanted that technology which is there in which provides all the data in public domain should take care of probity and so on. So what has the policy looked at in terms of technology is this large canvas. But coming to at a very micro level, the importance that students and teachers start leveraging and using technology in the best manner possible. And even for that matter, you have I think my voice is echoing that.
You're fine. Yeah, a slight echo came in, but you're good, Dr. Shakila.
Yeah, yeah. So the importance, therefore, of understanding that ChatGPT will be used by the students, but at the same time, you can't prevent that merely by using a rod. How do you convert that into an opportunity? So there is now a pedagogical technique where in many of the colleges and universities, the faculty would tell the students, this is an assignment. And you know that in a computer language, it's garbage in, garbage out. So if the same question is going to throw out the same answer. But what is important is that the student is not asked that question. The student is asked if you got an answer from ChatGPT. What were the sources it used to prepare that answer? And what were the sources, the resources it did not use and should have been used to get that answer? Yeah, is it because I don't have an echo from my side because I am not logged in from any other site? But is there someone who is logged in from two systems which can cause this kind of an echo? Okay, I think it's gone now. It's gone now at the moment. Okay. Yeah, I think it's better now. So we need to look at the plus and minus of technology, need to understand that this is the growing factor and that students and teachers must be equipped to handle the changes that are happening because of technology and not keep lamenting that today's children are not individualistic, they are not doing things on their own. You have to accept that they will do that. And therefore, what the NEP has provided some enablers. There have been a lot of changes that have happened after that. And it is for that to become successful that you need to understand technology has both its good and minus. And you need to sort of balance the two, both at individual levels, meaning the student or the teacher or the trainer or the leader or the academic head of the institution, and at an institutional level, how do you address issues of digital divides? For example, I suggest that we keep changing our phones. Do we have just like a book bank, do we have a digital bank in colleges? Can we use our outdated phones to be donated to the institutions for the less fortunate to use it? These are some ideas that we can think of to see that digital divides do not get multiplied, but that we are optimizing the available digital resources for the betterment of other students, and it is available to them at an institutional level in an actual structured manner with processes that so and so gave it, and this has to be used by other students. I'll stop here. I can go on, but I think time is the concern.
So you touched upon some very interesting aspects when you said the digital divide and then technology and innovation. And I loved what you just said. If all of us are listening in, I think that was fundamentally really important how when they use ChatGPT, you're not really looking at what kind of responses, but how did they approach? So what we are really tapping into is about everyone's going to leverage technology, especially the millennials or the new generation, but it's more important to look at their innovation, their approach, their analytical ability and problem solving ability, rather than looking at how did they just arrive at the response. Response is not important. So I think you have really brought in the revolutionary transformative power of looking at how means are important, not just the end or the outcome. I think that is what will awaken the innovative and creative genius among our students, especially when we're talking about innovators being created and the slogans or the way India today is in a power position given the demographic dividend. And across the globe now, there are too many eyes looking at India, not just because we have the demographic dividend, but also technological horsepower and capability and largest workforce available. So the way we can tap into using this horsepower of the new education policy, one of the other aspects you talked about, Dr. Shakila, is also about sustainability. And today, UN has clearly come up, whether it's corporates, so global citizens or corporate citizens, whichever way we look at it, ESG has become a buzzword. So when we are looking at this environmental, social, as well as governance, and then we're looking at the new education policy and the sustainability initiatives, where do you see that they are really coming together in terms of integration through bringing in the educators, various stakeholders, start thinking progressively and the kind of workforce we are shaping and bringing out?
Thank you, Dr. Kiranmai. And you see, higher education is largely looked at in the three functions of teaching, research, and community engagement or social outreach, and so on. Unfortunately, I think all of us are guilty of giving a very reductionist view of higher education and looking at higher education as only preparing students to take up some ready-made jobs that are there. And in that, when I say all of us are, I mean not only the educators and the educational institutions, but also the industry and the entire the corporate sector seems to be talking about a customized person who can fit into a work scenario, not looking at higher education, making an individual a more committed individual and looking at issues that affect the entire society as such. So it is in that context that when we talk about education for sustainable development, and which emanates from the four pillars of learning, in which we talk about a pillar of learning, which is learning to live together and to live with others, as one of the fundamental principle pillars of learning in the 21st century, that we need to look at protecting the three P's that we talk about of is the sustainable development, that is the people, the planet, and the coming together of partnerships. So the partnerships become very important to achieve sustainable development goals. So when we say, for example, environment, and when we look at issues of climate change, or we look in terms of energy, renewable sources of energy, and we think of alternate sources that can be there, it cannot be done by academia alone. It has to be with a very productive uh, partnership and collaboration that happens with industry, that happens with the research laboratories, that happens with communities, because it is, we can't leave communities out. You can't sit in ivory towers with, in five-star hotels and talk about transforming lives of people unless you get the communities also into that. So the collaboration from all the relevant stakeholders, not on a one-off basis, but as a very continuous process through, let us say, standard operating protocols, which create for bodies. So when in the policy, for example, we have talked about higher education institutions preparing institutional development plans. And we talked about that being a collegiate body, not just of the higher management alone, but of the civil society, of the industry, of agriculturalists, of people from the sports field, for people from the arts field, all coming together. Because when we all look at any issues of environment, art may be a very good form to convey the importance of trying to preserve, protect, and ensure that our environmental degradation doesn't happen. Sports people become brand ambassadors, and the kind of materials that they use must be sustainable. The same way, like you have the standard line, don't print this email unless you have to, kind of thing. These are things that needs to get internalized. So when you look at education for sustainable development, you need to go beyond looking at merely the fundamentals of basic life to look at, as I said, life skills education, looking at community involvement, looking at industry coming together and providing maybe the expertise and the resources, the research laboratories coming and doing research in those areas so that they are all able to meaningfully support the educational institutions. And that is how in the NEP, we wrote about a National Research Foundation. It has also fructified, and it is there as the Rashtriya Anusandhan Ayog, and which provides a lot of funding so as to nurture research at an undergraduate level and create a culture or an ecosystem where industry, research laboratories, trainers, and educational institutions come together to undertake multidisciplinary kind of research, which would cover many of these areas which relate to sustainable development, because all areas of sustainable development are cross-cutting by nature, and they are not isolated in only engineering, or they are not isolated in only agriculture or medicine or social sciences or so on. They are cross-cutting by nature, they are multidisciplinary by nature, and therefore that kind of an ecosystem cannot come about by only one stakeholder thinking about an issue and trying to find solutions. So a very collaborative approach, so that if India is talking about a zero carbon footprint, but that's of course a very long target, because in my other avatar, I'm also a member of India MUN. I think 2070 is a very far off goal that we have set. We should be looking at targets much before that. We should be looking at our students being nominated as forest ambassadors. How much of deforestation can our school students start doing, preparing, creating forests again? How do we create leadership in students to take forward issues relating to environment? There's a whole lot of things that we are looking at. And environment education has come in for a lot of thrust and focus as part of NEP because of many of these issues. And I think waking up to those issues by the stakeholders in a collaborative manner alone may be able to help us to really go forward in India becoming a leader in attaining many of the goals, particularly in the global south, because you know that there is a divide again. And in the global south, if we can take a very great leadership role in that and use all industry and academia and research and community and all stakeholders coming together, I'm sure we will stand to become a world leader fighting for that cause. And I think industry can't say it's not our work. Academia can't say that I can't do it alone. It's a fact, but we need to come together. So it's not enough to really have conversations of this kind unless there is a lot of follow-up that happens on outcomes of these kind and taken forward to some, actual end target. This is what happens in all our conversations that we are having, huge level conferences that we go on speaking. But what is the outcome of that when we talk about these very pertinent issues? It's merely there as an archival value, and it's merely there as a video that is there on the YouTube. Beyond that, it is not having its ripple effect, which I'm sorry to say that it is something that pains us as educators also, and as very caring citizens, not just of this nation, but of the entire globe.
Awesome. One of the things you touched upon, you talked about various stakeholders and how everyone has a stake in the game. It's not just industry, it's not just educators. And how do we really look at bringing in these measures? So, as we're looking, we are a body, a professional body, Indian Society for Training and Development. So, when we're looking at, and we have such eminent educators, corporate professionals, trainers, consultants among us. So, what are your thoughts, Dr. Shakila, when we're looking at bringing in ISTD or bodies like ISTD, given their length and breadth and the depth of professionalism and expertise, what can bodies like these contribute in this transformation journey? What can they contribute, and what kind of trainings they can initiate or think differently when they reach out to academia or corporate world? Because we can play that bridge. So can you throw some light upon it?
So actually, ISTD and similarly placed organizations which have a pan-India footprint and which have various stakeholders coming in from, not just industry, but in education and so on. Actually, one is, of course, what we do as the normal discussions that happen. But a lot of, actionable literature needs to start coming out. A lot of actionable literature in which are not like voluminous documents for people to see, because people don't have the time today to really look at very voluminous, just 3 pages kind of pamphlets that can go around that this is an issue that is there. Maybe it's a disposal of some let us say technology waste that is there, computer waste for that matter, or it is some issue related to better greening of this or urban waste management, many things of that kind. But on any given issue, which are pertinent issues, firstly identify about 20 or 30 of them. Say that in the coming year, starting from the financial year of 2025 to 2026, ISTD, it's just a suggestion, I'm just doing a loud thinking at the moment, is that identify some 20 or 20, 25 odd areas, have these are the areas, and on these, what actions can be done? It could be floating around like a Google Doc across people who are there in ISTD and a few others who get associated, like right now I'm there, and getting thoughts that can be there, which say what is the problem, what is the action to be taken, and what are the modalities to do that. Now, these kind of literature that we bring out must go out to as many institutions as possible. That creates a lot of awareness, advocacy, and awareness building can be taken up. That is one action. The other is, of course, the training that we can have. So while you conduct programs of this kind, the need that we can go in for hybrid models of maybe 2-day sessions, where it is a combination of both online and face-to-face, where you get in not just people who come and make paper presentations, but work on certain solutions and try to come out with some kind of training where people who are there in institutions, people who are there in the skilled workforce, people who are there in industry and in training bodies are there to actually come together, think about it, and sort of do training of functionaries how to go about it. So we are looking at, I think to start with, these two activities itself will make quite a difference. I mean, it could be something you start with. You can have a whole host of other suggestions, but it should not be something that it has to be pragmatic. And so that is why I don't want to sound very idealistic. I can list out a whole lot of things, but they would be very, very idealistic. But these two, if you say that we, in a given financial year, we'll have 4 such, training programs, which will bring in not just, and I don't really appreciate higher education being segregated from school education. That has been one of the things that has fallen between the stools. And I think the integration of schools with higher education in a very organic manner is very important. And that is why leadership actually starts building up from school levels in our youngsters. And that needs to be nurtured. So look at a program of 4 in a year, which looks at both these verticals to taken together, training institutions, faculty development that comes together, all of them together, along with those leaflets. I think ISD will make a difference. And get in the industry, get in the people from the skilling forces, get in people from edtech companies, get them all together on a common platform, along with sports persons and artists and so on.
Awesome. Just as we talk about the ship, if it needs to reach the shore, it needs a lighthouse. I think, Dr. Shekila, when we're talking about policy and multiple other facets, including sustainability, ESG, and diversity, inclusion, you have really been that pillar where you're throwing light to all of us what we can do as a way forward. Now, I would also request the participants, any questions, comments, any thoughts on your mind. We have Dr. Shekila Shamshu. It'll be wonderful if any of you can unmute. That's the message I put in the chat window, and ask a question, or you can place it in the chat window. I do see a message coming in. Let's see. All right, from Bharati, it says it's a well-known fact that the skill set available in the job market is not on par with the industry demand and changing needs. How do you think that the scenarios can change? So we're talking about the onset of gig economy and multiple. Yes, Bharati. Dr. Shekila, that's a question. It's a supply and demand in terms of skill set and job market needs.
Yeah, and to be very frank, you have a very evolving set of skill sets that are there today. But if you look at all the 21st century skill sets that students need to have, in terms of digital skills, in terms of problem solving, analytical skills, independent thinking, and so on, I think these are things that are not really to be taught separately, but integrated within our curriculum. And you see what has continuously happened, and I say that from my own experience, we looked at skill-based education as if it was something to be kept away from mainstream education. But today, when you look at logistics management or you look at agribusiness management, you're looking at embedding it within the mainstream education itself. So even with the skills, when you say that a student has to develop problem solving skills or creative skills, it's not that problem solving skills are only for engineering students, or it is not that problem solving skills are only in applied sciences and so on. Every student has to be empowered with these kind of skills. Now, industry trying to say that the students coming out not having the skill sets, we are actually trying to minimize the training cost of industry because we are trying to create students who are comprehensive, holistic graduates. In the sense they have domain knowledge, they have the kind of skill sets, they have the higher order thinking skills, they also are capable of having all the work area related skills. And therefore, all that you need may be a little bit of polishing to really meet that requirement. But I would never agree to the fact that if a student is learning only for a given industry, say for example, when Mercedes-Benz in Pune started with a mechatronics course. Now, Mercedes-Benz today, the way it manufactures cars, may not be the way it manufactures cars coming 10 years. You might have complete different mechanics that operate there. So a student who studied mechatronics at a time when technology was of certain kind would be completely redundant because you cannot really customize to a given product. So you must have a broader skill set. You must have the students having an adaptability and must have some minimal areas of exposure so that they are able to sort of build upon that kind. That is the kind of very fluid scenario that you need to look at for the skills and not really make it merely industry customized, but looking at it from the point that technology changes, the mechanics changes, the demands change, and you need to sort of prepare students for that kind of fluidity with which we are living in.
I think very, very pertinent because we're talking about that agility, that resilience, and the preparedness. Given the ever changing demands of the industry, you can never have a fully designed product coming out of the tertiary education or any school. Absolutely, yes. So, that agility and continuous learning is what will shape them. And that's where I think we have the task. Now, with that, any further
Dr. Kiranmai,
questions? Yes,
Dr.
yes.
Kiranmai, I have a question for Dr.
Yes,
Shakila.
Mr. Reddy, go ahead, please.
Thank you so much. See, Dr. Shakila, you have elaborately said so much about NEP, National Education Policy. But the feeling is with the student community is that it doesn't properly address the aspirations of the student community. That is one. Number two, it's because the classroom infrastructure in most of the schools doesn't, the qualify for such a sort of education policy. Number two is the inadequacy of the faculty. Faculty is yet to sort of develop themselves into technology mode. Number three, the technology is shying away from rural segment. It's because nobody seems to understand the rural population is much higher than the urban population, where the rural population needs to be properly developed into sort of skill sets or technology based or whatever it is. So all these things NEP doesn't seem to sort of address. Can you say why these things are all sort of not adequately, properly taken care of with NEP, please?
So I wasn't really talking about the NEP in today's session alone, but I was trying to weave in NEP as part of the larger discussion. But to say that the NEP did not look at the student population coming from the rural areas, the very fact that we made higher education and promoted the idea of multilingualism to enhance the GER to reach 50% by 2035 and made a complete break from saying that it will no longer be necessary to do that only in English, but that it would be available in regional languages, was one way of trying to really reach out to students who are coming in from a background which is agrarian and which we are very, very conscious about, that they are having it possibly in their regional languages. So it's not that. And to be very frank, when we looked at the entire omnibus term of the socially and economically disadvantaged group, one of our major segments was to concentrate on children who come in from geographically inaccessible hilly areas and rural areas, and talk in terms of how institutions in those areas, be they schools or colleges, are sort of given focused funding through, let us say, social inclusion funds or earmarking such areas as special education zones. But let me also tell you why it apparently seems that NEP has not done it, because very little has been done in those areas which should have been done. And you must also understand that it is not so simple in a country which is a federal structure where state governments have to take a lot of initiative and which is resource starved also. So what you find on one side, the NEP says that we must strengthen public education, which means both the government schools and government aided schools and colleges and universities which are funded by the state. The other hand, the resource constraints have not been able to address faculty shortages, not been able to address infrastructure deficits, and these apparently are coming in the way. The biggest hurdle is the attitudinal problem. The attitudinal problem of a generation which came in from a very structured system of education, which is not able to understand that when we allow for the disappearances of curricular, co-curricular, and extracurricular, and tell that a student learning painting is as important as a student learning mathematics, it becomes a rude shock for us. We have created a hierarchy of subjects. So NEP, theoretically, in terms of what the policy articulates, has definitely taken into account all these diversities that we have, not only the diversities, but also the very wide disparities that exist, and has made a number of recommendations, but these are still beginning to come in. As I said in my beginning angst, they are only coming in with baby steps. And that comes in because there is a lot of resistance from a number of stakeholders who do not look at the policy from the angle of a policy, but looks beyond looks at it at the politics of that policy. And that is where I say, as an educator, don't look at a policy as a person belonging to a certain political party or a certain state government which is of this color or denomination, but rather look at the transformative nature that we must bring about so that all students, irrespective of caste, creed, color, location, are able to have access to good quality education in a sustainable manner. And I think NEP, in terms of its recommendations, have not minced its words about it. The 22 cardinal principles in the very first chapter of the document articulates this very spirit that I am saying with so much of passion and commitment.
Thank you.
Thank you. I think we do not have any questions. So back to you. Oh, we do have one from Sarga. The NEP highlights the need for gender inclusion and flexible learning. What policy changes are needed to create safer and more inclusive campuses for women, LGBTQ plus students, and non-binary individuals in higher education? Great question, especially now with what's happening in corporate America, where President Trump's presidential address actually put a huge spanner. NASDAQ and Goldman Sachs and everybody and many other major companies, including Amazon, have backtracked on their diversity and inclusion policies. So over to you.
Yeah, so the aspect of equity, diversity, and inclusion, as I said, when we wrote about it, we not only talked about girls, but we also talked about transgenders. And we talked about having a very gender neutral approach, including in terms of sexual orientations and preferences that individuals may have. And we expect that campuses in their diversity policies try to incorporate that, because you see, these are things that evolve. Now, the spanner may have come in now with maybe a leader of one of the largest nations in the world today that we talk about. But attitudinally, it still remains that our campuses, both in higher education and in schools, must remain safe campuses. So the need, therefore, to have a lot of dialogue and to ensure that our curricula is inclusive by nature. It does not look at gender stereotyping. It does not make judgmental decisions in terms of orientations that people may have. All these things are actually very much there, maybe as very small lines within the policy, but it is not merely the policy alone. It's more in terms of institutions building up a culture of equity, diversity, and inclusion. And we also know, while I say this, that when you have conversations, even a talk being given by a person who comes from a certain orientation, there are many universities which have backtracked because it doesn't seem to subscribe to the larger thought process. Now, those are things that requires not merely an education policy, but a more evolved way of thinking and a society that accepts that I differ from you, yet I respect how you think or how you dress or how you behave or what you eat or what your sexual orientation may be. That really doesn't matter. So the respect for human dignity, and that is where I talked about creating humanistic societies. And I think it is more in terms, not merely restricting it to a very limited area of NEP, but looking at maybe, as I said, attitudinal changes that need to come about. So in terms of the policy, yes, you've talked about gender, we've talked about transgenders. The National Curriculum Framework for School Education talks about making our school spaces very safe and secure for all children, not just for the girls, but also for the young boys. And that's why I said it has to be a gender neutral one. But these are things that only evolved societies will do that. And I think we are still, unfortunately, a very long way. We have a very long way to go, I think.
Thank you, Dr. Shakila. I think to wrap up, the key nuggets, I think what we have received is you're stressing upon the growth mindset, the agility to broad base and embrace and build in a larger humanistic society, human-centric society, where everyone's voice is understood, whether we can disagree, but we welcome all perspectives. So it's not just about a policy, but how various stakeholders join hands, including bodies like Indian Society for Training and Development, how we can contribute. So it's like a drop in the ocean, but every drop matters. How every single one of us have this responsibility to build the transformative power of leveraging these policies and bringing them into action. So how do we move from fixed mindset to growth mindset and demonstrate agility and constantly look for opportunities to make it human centric, and we remove all barriers and shackles which largely rest within us, because we always say we are spiders caught in our own web. And I think that's what Dr. Shakila has clearly, very eruditely talked about. And once again, ma'am, it's been a pillar in terms of, that's why I'm reminded of that lighthouse analogy. You have been shedding light on various dimensions of not just crafting a policy, but the challenges on the path when we have to move. And these are the tectonic shifts you're referring to, where every one of us have a stake in the game. Thank you so much for really spending your time and throwing light on various dimensions and the nutty problems and difficult and tough situation. But it takes more than a village to make this possible. So thank you all for active participation, ISTDians. And over to you, Dr. Zakaria, if you want to, have any closing remarks.
Thank you so much,
Good night.
ma'am. Thank you so much, ma'am. It was really interesting. The last 1 hour, it was very vibrant discussion. Shakila ma'am was rightly crafting the evolving landscape of globalized higher education. One thing I noticed, the most importantly, is her comment regarding the responsibility for this transformation, even if it is ESG, that is not just the responsibility of one party, it is the responsibility of the entire stakeholders. We all are responsible. Parties, whether it is in the academic side, government side, social side, everyone is responsible. So that is something very important that we should note. And ma'am has been explaining the need for becoming flexible and adopting changes, need for divergent thought to adopt the kind of changes that are taking place in the global scenario. It was really enriching and amazing, ma'am. Very, very awesome deliberation. And deliberation was has been meaningful because the skill of the moderator in digging out what is required to discuss and debate. It was amazing, Kiranmai, ma'am. So I thank Shakila ma'am for delivering this lecture, and I thank Dr. Kiranmai ma'am for moderating the session so enthusiastically and maintaining the interest of the participants for last 1 hour. So I thank our National President Adul Shah, who has been with us from the very beginning till this moment. Thank you, sir, for inaugurating this first edition of the Southern Region webinar series and being with us and all support. Thank you so much. And I thank all the members who have joined for this first edition of the webinar series. Looking forward to have your continued support. We'll be coming back with our second edition by second week of next month with another outstanding personality and with a more meaningful topic. So looking forward to have your continued support. I thank Gurvinder, who has been there behind the curtain, giving all technical support to operate this Zoom and maintaining it in a stable manner. So thank you, Gurvinder, for all the support.
Thank you, sir.
Once again, I thank everyone, every ISTD, senior members, NC members, people from the student chapters, and all well-wishers for making this a grand success. Thank you all. Looking forward to meet you all for next edition in second week of next month. Thank you all.
Great kickstart, Dr. Zakaria. Congratulations. It was an exciting journey of an hour. We had an excellent conversation in a sense between Dr. Kiranmai and Dr. Shakila. Was exciting, and you could conjure and bring a lot of people from across the country together. We had Dr. Rajiv from Mysuru, we had Dr. Srinivas Rao, Dr. Anand Reddy from Hyderabad. We had all the way from Gurgaon. You could get Mr. Raj Antil to be here. We had Pradipta Acharya from Silvassa, and we had also our guru and mentor from Chennai, Dr. Reddy. So it's a pan-India audience, and congratulations. Well done, everybody.
Thank you
for
all.
the opportunity, and good night, and take care and
And
stay
good
safe.
night.
Thank you all for the opportunity. Thank you. Thank you.
Good night.